Have you ever driven past a dumpster and thought, there's nothing in there worth saving? Most people do, but one veteran didn't. On a cold Tuesday morning in rural Tennessee, Marcus Hale, a 54-year-old Army veteran with 2 bad knees, a small plot of land, and almost no money, pulled out a cardboard box soaking wet from rain. Inside, 300 cracked duck eggs. The grocery store manager had laughed at him. His neighbor had shaken his head. Even his own son had called him on the phone that evening and said, "Dad, you've really lost it this time." But Marcus didn't throw those eggs away. He took them home. And 63 days later, those eggs, those broken, abandoned, laughed-at eggs, would change his life forever. This is that story. To understand why Marcus did what he did, you have to understand who Marcus is. He served 2 tours in the U.S. Army, first in the Gulf, then in Afghanistan. When he came home in 2009, he came back different, quieter, slower to smile. He'll tell you himself that farming saved his life, not therapy, not medication, though he tried both. It was the land, the routine, the animals. He'd started small, a few laying hens, a vegetable patch, some fruit trees on the 2-acre property he'd inherited from his father. He wasn't getting rich. He was getting by. And for a man who'd spent years in chaos, getting by felt like a miracle. But in the spring of 2021, things got harder. A late frost wiped out half his garden. 3 of his hens died to a fox that dug under the coop. And a water pipe burst beneath his property, flooding the lower field and running up a repair bill he hadn't budgeted for. Marcus was stretched thin. And that's where the story really begins. Not with heroism, not with grand plans, but with a man who simply couldn't afford to waste anything. He was doing his regular run past the grocery distribution center, looking for discarded produce he could use as animal feed, when he spotted the delivery driver tossing a rain-soaked box into the dumpster. He asked what was in it. The driver shrugged. "Duck eggs. Supplier dropped them during transit. Cracked all to hell. Can't sell 'em." Marcus didn't ask another question. He asked if he could take them. The driver looked at him the way people look at someone they've decided is a little bit off. Then he said, "Knock yourself out, man." Marcus loaded the box into his truck. 300 eggs. Cracked, cold, some of them leaking. Most people would have called it garbage. Marcus called it a second chance. Now here's where most people would stop watching, because what Marcus did next sounds on the surface absolutely insane. He decided to try to hatch them, all of them. If you know anything about incubating eggs, you know that a crack is almost always a death sentence. The shell isn't just protection, it's a breathing system. It regulates moisture, gas exchange, temperature. A crack can let in bacteria, dry out the developing embryo, or cause the egg to lose too much moisture to survive. Experienced hatchery operators throw cracked eggs away without a second thought. But Marcus had been reading. He'd spent years learning from old-timers, from homesteading forums, from agricultural extension documents, and he'd found scattered accounts, rare, mostly dismissed, of people successfully hatching mildly cracked eggs using a simple trick: beeswax. The idea is simple. If the crack is small enough, you can seal it with a thin layer of melted beeswax, not candlestick wax, not paraffin, but food-safe beeswax, and the egg can still breathe through the shell's pores while the crack is protected. It doesn't work for every egg. It doesn't even work for most cracked eggs. But for eggs with hairline fractures, the kind that come from a rough ride in a delivery truck rather than a direct impact, the survival rate can be surprisingly good. Marcus sorted through all 300 eggs on his kitchen table. He eliminated the ones that were shattered, about 80 of them. He eliminated the ones that were leaking heavily, another 60. That left him with roughly 160 eggs he believed had a fighting chance. He spent 4 hours sealing them, one by one, with beeswax. His wife Deborah watched from the doorway. "I didn't say anything," she told a local agriculture blogger who later wrote about the story. "I've learned not to say anything when he gets that look." The incubator Marcus used was a second-hand hovabator he'd bought for $30 at a farm auction 3 years prior. It held 42 eggs at a time. He didn't have the money or space to run multiple large incubators, so he did something clever. He borrowed 2 more incubators from neighbors, offering a share of any ducklings that hatched in exchange. By midnight on that first Tuesday, all 160 viable eggs were incubating. Marcus set his alarm for 4 a.m. He needed to check the temperature. This was going to take 28 days. Days 1 through 7 were the quietest. Marcus turned the eggs by hand 3 times a day, a critical step in natural incubation that prevents the embryo from sticking to the inner membrane. He monitored humidity levels obsessively. He lost sleep. He researched. He prayed, a little, in the way that farmers sometimes do, not asking for miracles, just asking for the odds to tilt slightly in his favor. On day 7, he candled the eggs. Candling is the process of holding a bright light source against the egg in a dark room to see what's happening inside. In a viable egg, you'll see the beginnings of veining, dark, spidery lines spreading out from a central mass. It looks almost like a tiny storm system forming inside a smooth white moon. Marcus candled all 160 eggs. He found development in 94 of them. He sat in his barn for a long moment. Then he called his son. "I think it's working," he said. His son was quiet for a moment. Then, "Dad, they're cracked eggs from a dumpster." "I know what they are," Marcus said. "Come visit in 3 weeks." Week 2 brought challenges. Humidity is the silent killer in egg incubation. Too low, and the air cell inside the egg grows too large, essentially suffocating the developing duckling. Too high, and excess moisture drowns it before it can pip through the shell. Marcus lost 11 eggs in week 2, not to bacteria or temperature, but to a malfunctioning hygrometer that gave him false humidity readings. When he replaced it with a new one, he discovered the incubator had been running 15% too dry for 4 days. He adjusted, he compensated, but 11 eggs were already gone. 83 remained viable heading into week 3. This is the week that breaks most first-time hatchery operators. The eggs look the same on the outside. The candling shows large, dark masses that are hard to interpret. There's no movement yet, or almost none. You're just waiting, trusting, holding the temperature and humidity steady and refusing to panic. Marcus held steady. And then, on day 24, 4 days before the expected hatch date, something happened that nobody had anticipated. He heard a sound coming from the incubator, a faint, soft, insistent tapping. Duck eggs don't peep the same way chicken eggs do. It's lower, softer, almost like a question being asked from inside a sealed room. Marcus stood in his barn at 6 a.m., still in his pajamas, and listened. Then he heard a second one. Then a third internal pipping is the moment a duckling breaks through the inner membrane and enters the air cell, the small pocket of oxygen inside the egg. It's the first breath, the first sound, the first signal that something alive has been waiting in there all along. Marcus called Deborah. She came out in her robe. They stood together in the barn and listened to 83 eggs knock and chirp and announce themselves to the world. "I started crying," Marcus said later. "I'm not ashamed of it. After everything, the frost, the fox, the pipe, the neighbors laughing, I stood in that barn and I just cried." Over the next 72 hours, the hatching began in earnest. Hatching is not a clean or graceful process. Ducklings emerge exhausted, soaking wet, utterly disoriented. They spend their first hour lying on their sides like tiny disasters. Then something shifts. The feathers begin to fluff. The legs find purchase. The eyes open, dark and bright and absurdly alive. One by one, Marcus's dumpster ducks came into the world. Over 3 days of hatching, 67 ducklings emerged alive and healthy. 67. From 300 cracked eggs that a grocery delivery driver had laughed about. From an experiment that his son had called crazy. From a cold Tuesday morning when a veteran with bad knees decided that nothing worth saving should be thrown away. Marcus called his son again. This time, his son drove out that same evening. 67 Pekin ducklings grow fast. Within a week, they were doubling in size daily, consuming feed at a rate that startled Marcus even though he'd expected it. Within 3 weeks, they were outside on the grass, testing the small pond he'd dug as a watering feature for his chickens. By week 6, they were unmistakably ducks. White, waddling, absurdly loud at feeding time, opinionated about everything. Marcus had done his research before the hatch. He knew he had decisions to make. 67 ducks is not a small operation. He couldn't afford to feed them all indefinitely. and he didn't have the infrastructure for a full-scale commercial duck farm. He kept 22 of the female ducks, the hens, for egg production. Pekin ducks are not the highest producers, but they lay reliably, and duck eggs command a premium at farmers' markets and with local bakers, who prize their richer yolk and higher fat content. He sold 30 ducklings to 3 neighboring farms at 8 weeks of age, healthy, pasture-raised, and priced fairly. That single transaction cleared his water pipe repair bill. He processed the remaining 15 drakes for meat, humanely, on-farm, in accordance with Tennessee regulations, and sold them to 2 local restaurants that had been looking for a pastured duck supplier. Within 4 months of that cold Tuesday morning at the dumpster, Marcus Hale's small farm had a new revenue stream, 12 fewer financial pressures, and 67 reasons to keep going. His son came out to help build the new duck shelter. He didn't say anything about being wrong. He didn't need to. He paused. I spent 20 years in the Army being handed broken situations and told to fix them. I don't know how to look at something broken and walk away. It's not in me. Here's what Marcus wants other small farmers, especially those just starting out, or those going through a hard season, to take away from his story. First, resourcefulness is a skill, not a personality trait. It can be practiced. Start by looking differently at what you've been taught to dismiss. Second, your neighbor's laughter is not data. People laughed at him. People shook their heads. Not one of them offered a better idea. Social skepticism is almost always about someone else's comfort with the unfamiliar. It tells you nothing about whether your idea will work. Third, small farms survive on margins that most people never see. Every discarded resource represents a margin. Duck eggs from a dumpster, spent grain from a local brewery as free chicken feed, fallen apples as pig forage. The farmers who last aren't always the biggest. They're the ones who see value where others see waste. And fourth, the timeline is longer than you think. Those 67 ducks didn't hatch in a day. They took 28 days of attention, adjustment, loss, and stubbornness. Most things that matter do. The last time someone spoke to Marcus about the dumpster eggs, he was at a local farm fair, selling duck eggs by the dozen from a cooler with a handwritten sign. A woman stopped at his table and asked how he'd gotten into duck farming. He told her the short version. She laughed, not unkindly. "That's the craziest thing I've ever heard," she said. He handed her a carton. "Try the eggs," he said. "Tell me if they taste crazy." She bought 2 dozen. Stories like Marcus's don't make the national news. They don't trend on social media. They happen quietly, on small plots of land, by people who can't afford to give up and won't afford to stop trying. This channel exists for exactly those stories. If this one moved you, if you found yourself rooting for 67 eggs that nobody believed in, hit that subscribe button